Rodriguez watched through her scope as the enemy fighters advanced methodically toward her position, their movement coordinated despite the loss of their commander. She had 18 rounds remaining and approximately 35 hostile combatants closing within 200 meters. The mathematical reality was sobering, but her training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. The first enemy fighter appeared at 170 meters, moving between rocks with the careful precision of an experienced soldier. Rodriguez centered her crosshairs on his chest and squeezed the trigger smoothly, watching him drop immediately. 17 rounds remaining. Contact, contact. Rodriguez reported into her radio as enemy fighters began returning fire, engaging multiple targets at close range. The sound of incoming bullets snapping overhead and striking rocks around her position created a deadly symphony that Rodriguez had trained for, but never experienced at this intensity. Fragments of stone kicked up by near misses stung her face as she acquired her second target. A fighter had positioned himself behind a boulder 80 meters away and was firing an AK-47 in her direction with remarkable accuracy. Rodriguez adjusted for the closer range and put her second shot center mass, eliminating the threat. 16 rounds remaining. Her radio crackled with Thompson's voice from the extraction helicopter. Rodriguez, we're inbound to your position. Mark your location with smoke. Rodriguez fumbled for a smoke grenade while maintaining observation through her scope. The yellow smoke would signal her position to friendly aircraft, but would also clearly mark her location for enemy fighters who were already dangerously close to overrunning her hide site. Popping smoke now, Rodriguez transmitted as she activated the signal grenade and tossed it 15 meters from her position. The yellow smoke billowed up from the rocky terrain, creating an unmistakable beacon that could be seen for kilometers across the Afghan landscape. Almost immediately, enemy fire intensified as Taliban fighters focused their assault on the smoke-marked position. Rodriguez shifted to a secondary firing position she had prepared 30 meters away, using the smoke as concealment while enemy fighters concentrated their fire on her previous location. From the new position, she had excellent visibility of fighters who were advancing through the smoke, confident they were about to overrun her position. 3 enemy fighters emerged from the yellow cloud within 50 meters of her original hide. Rodriguez engaged them rapidly with precision shots that dropped all 3 combatants in less than 10 seconds. 13 rounds remaining. The helicopter was now visible in the distance, a UH-60 Black Hawk flying low and fast toward her position. Rodriguez could see the aircraft's gunners preparing their weapons for close air support, but she also knew that enemy fighters were now close enough to engage the helicopter with small arms fire during landing approach. Bird approaching from the east, Rodriguez observed through her scope. Multiple enemy positions with clear shots at landing zone. She identified 2 enemy machine gun positions that posed the greatest threat to the incoming helicopter. Both were positioned on rocky outcroppings that provided excellent fields of fire across the proposed landing zone. Eliminating those positions would significantly improve the aircraft's chances of successful extraction. Rodriguez acquired the first machine gun position through her scope. The enemy crew was approximately 120 meters away, well positioned behind cover, but focused on preparing for engagement with the helicopter. She centered her crosshairs on the gunner and fired, immediately shifting to the assistant gunner who was feeding ammunition. 2 quick shots eliminated both crew members, but Rodriguez noticed a third fighter moving to take control of the abandoned weapon. Her third shot dropped him before he could bring the machine gun into action. 10 rounds remaining. The second machine gun position required a more difficult shot across a small ravine at approximately 140 meters. The enemy crew had better cover and were clearly aware that they were under sniper fire. Rodriguez could see only partial targets through gaps in their rocky fortification. She waited patiently for one of the enemy fighters to expose himself sufficiently for accurate engagement. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see the machine gunner's shoulder and part of his head as he adjusted his weapon's position for firing at the approaching helicopter. The shot required precise placement to strike the small, exposed target area. Rodriguez controlled her breathing carefully and squeezed the trigger at the optimal moment, watching the enemy gunner collapse immediately. 9 rounds remaining. The Black Hawk was now less than 1 kilometer away and rapidly closing on her position. Rodriguez could hear the distinctive sound of its rotor blades echoing across the valley, but she could also see additional enemy fighters moving toward positions where they could engage the aircraft during landing. Multiple enemy positions preparing to engage extraction bird, Rodriguez reported. I can see at least 15 fighters with RPGs and small arms converging on landing zone. Thompson's voice responded immediately. Rodriguez, we need that landing zone clear for 30 seconds. Can you suppress enemy positions long enough for pickup? Rodriguez surveyed the tactical situation through her scope. 15 enemy fighters with rocket-propelled grenades represented an overwhelming threat to the helicopter that could not be adequately suppressed with her remaining ammunition. However, she noticed something that might provide an alternative solution. Approximately 800 meters away, she could see several vehicles from the original Taliban convoy that had been abandoned when the firefight began. One vehicle appeared to be a fuel truck that could create significant secondary explosions if properly engaged. I have an idea, Rodriguez transmitted. There's a fuel truck at 800 meters that might create enough chaos to suppress enemy fire during extraction. Thompson's response carried obvious concern. 800 meters is a hell of a long shot, Rodriguez. Are you sure you can make it? Rodriguez studied the target through her high-powered scope. The fuel truck was clearly visible and stationary, but 800 meters represented the extreme limit of her rifle's effective range. Environmental factors including wind, temperature, and elevation would all affect bullet trajectory at that distance. Wind speed approximately 10 miles per hour, quartering from left, Rodriguez calculated aloud. Temperature has risen significantly since morning, which will affect bullet drop. Range to target is 796 meters. She made corresponding adjustments to her scope, compensating for the environmental variables that could cause her shot to miss by several meters at extreme range. The fuel truck's fuel tank would need to be struck precisely to create the explosion she hoped would suppress enemy fire. Rodriguez, whatever you're going to do it now. Thompson urged as the helicopter approached within 500 meters of the landing zone. We're taking ground fire from multiple positions. Rodriguez settled into her most stable shooting position and controlled her breathing as she prepared for the most important shot of her military career. Through her scope, she could see the fuel truck clearly, but also noticed enemy fighters positioning themselves to engage the incoming helicopter. The shot required perfect calculation and execution. Rodriguez had trained for extreme range engagements, but this represented conditions that pushed beyond normal training scenarios. The success of the extraction and possibly her survival depended on precise placement of a single bullet across 800 meters of Afghan terrain. She centered her crosshairs on the fuel truck's tank, accounting for bullet drop and wind drift that would affect projectile flight at extended range. Rodriguez squeezed the trigger with smooth, controlled pressure while maintaining perfect sight alignment through the moment of recoil. The bullet flight time at 800 meters was approximately 1 second, during which Rodriguez maintained her shooting position and observed through her scope. She watched the projectile strike exactly where she had aimed. The fuel truck's tank ruptured and immediately exploded in a massive fireball that created secondary explosions from ammunition stored in nearby vehicles. The explosion was far larger than Rodriguez had anticipated. The fuel truck detonated with enough force to shatter windows in buildings 500 meters away, and the secondary explosions created a chain reaction that destroyed most of the abandoned convoy vehicles. Enemy fighters who had been preparing to engage the helicopter were knocked down by the blast wave or forced to take cover from flying debris. The massive explosion created enough shock and confusion to temporarily suppress all enemy fire in the immediate area. Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez. Thompson shouted over the radio as the Black Hawk swept in for landing. Enemy fire has completely stopped. Rodriguez gathered her equipment rapidly while maintaining observation for any enemy movement toward the landing zone. The explosion had created a smoke cloud that provided concealment for the helicopter's approach, but also limited visibility for detecting threats. The Black Hawk touched down approximately 50 meters from Rodriguez's position, its rotors creating a whirlwind of dust and debris that made movement difficult but provided additional concealment from enemy observation. Rodriguez could see Thompson hanging out of the aircraft's cargo door, motioning urgently for her to run toward the helicopter. Rodriguez sprinted across the rocky terrain toward the waiting aircraft while carrying her rifle and essential equipment. Behind her, she could hear enemy fighters beginning to recover from the shock of the explosion and resume their assault on the landing zone. Bullets began snapping past her head as Taliban fighters reacquired their targets and opened fire on the helicopter and running Marine. Rodriguez zigzagged between boulders while maintaining forward momentum toward the Black Hawk, whose engines were already spinning up for immediate departure. 20 meters from the helicopter, Rodriguez felt a bullet tug at her sleeve and another strike the ground inches from her feet. Enemy fire was becoming increasingly accurate as fighters recovered from the explosion and focused on preventing her escape. Thompson and the helicopter's crew chief reached out to grab Rodriguez as she dove through the cargo door opening. The aircraft lifted off immediately as enemy fire intensified, with bullets striking the fuselage and cracking windows as they climbed rapidly away from the landing zone. "Is everyone okay?" Thompson shouted over the engine noise as the helicopter gained altitude and distance from the firefight. Rodriguez checked herself for wounds and found only minor cuts from rock fragments, despite the intensity of enemy fire during her extraction. The crew chief was examining bullet holes in the aircraft's hull, but reported no damage to critical systems or injury to crew members. All personnel accounted for and uninjured, the crew chief reported. Aircraft sustained multiple hits, but all systems are functioning normally. As they flew away from the battlefield, Rodriguez could see the massive smoke clouds still rising from the destroyed convoy vehicles. The explosion had been visible from kilometers away and would certainly be reported by enemy forces throughout the region. Thompson handed Rodriguez a bottle of water and sat beside her in the cargo bay. His expression had changed completely from their earlier interactions, showing respect and admiration that hadn't been present before their deployment. "Rodriguez, that was the most incredible shooting I've ever witnessed," Thompson said seriously. 800 meters on a fuel tank under combat conditions. That's going to be talked about for years. Rodriguez felt exhaustion beginning to replace the adrenaline that had sustained her through the firefight. The realization that she had survived an engagement with overwhelming enemy forces was just beginning to sink in as they flew toward their forward operating base. "How's Williams?" Rodriguez asked, concerned about the wounded Marine who had been extracted before her. "He's going to make it," Thompson replied. "Medics got him stabilized, and he'll be evacuated to Germany for surgery. He's going to recover fully and go home to his family because of what you did today." The helicopter approached forward operating base Chapman as the sun began to set over the Afghan mountains. Rodriguez could see other aircraft on the landing pad and medical personnel standing by, suggesting that word of their mission had already reached the base command structure. As they touched down, Rodriguez saw Captain Mitchell waiting beside the landing pad with what appeared to be senior officers she didn't recognize. Their presence indicated that the mission results were being treated as significant enough to warrant command attention. "Rodriguez, Thompson, you're both to report to the command post immediately for debrief," Captain Mitchell informed them as they disembarked from the helicopter. The debriefing lasted for 2 hours as intelligence officers questioned Rodriguez and Thompson about every aspect of their engagement with enemy forces. Particular attention was focused on Rodriguez's 800-meter shot that had eliminated the fuel truck and enabled their extraction. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, can you describe the environmental conditions and calculation process you used for that final shot?" inquired a lieutenant colonel from Division Intelligence. Rodriguez detailed the wind speed, temperature, range calculations, and scope adjustments she had made for the extreme range engagement. The officers took notes and asked technical questions that suggested they were documenting the engagement for training or operational purposes. After the formal debriefing concluded, Captain Mitchell asked Rodriguez and Thompson to remain for a private conversation. His expression indicated that additional information would be shared that hadn't been discussed during the official questioning. "What I'm about to tell you is classified and cannot be discussed outside this room," Captain Mitchell began. The Taliban commander you engaged today was not just any high-value target. Intelligence reports confirm that your actions eliminated Abu Rashid al-Ansari, one of the most wanted terrorist leaders in Afghanistan. Rodriguez felt her breath catch as the implications became clear. The convoy they had observed that morning had indeed been carrying a high-value target whose elimination would significantly impact enemy operations throughout the region. The fuel truck explosion you created also destroyed a significant cache of weapons and explosives that were being transported for use in attacks against coalition forces and Afghan civilians, Captain Mitchell continued. Conservative estimates suggest your actions prevented dozens of potential casualties. Thompson looked at Rodriguez with obvious amazement. You took out a major terrorist leader and a weapons cache with a single shot from 800 meters. That's going to go down in Marine Corps history. Captain Mitchell handed Rodriguez a folder containing what appeared to be official documentation. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, you're being recommended for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism under fire. Your actions today exemplify the highest traditions of the Marine Corps. Rodriguez opened the folder and read the citation that described her actions during the engagement. The formal military language couldn't capture the intensity and fear she had experienced, but it accurately documented the tactical situation and her responses to enemy contact. There's one more thing, Captain Mitchell added. The other sniper teams in the battalion have requested that you conduct training sessions on extreme-range shooting techniques. Apparently, word of your 800-meter shot has already spread throughout the unit. Rodriguez realized that her deployment had fundamentally changed from the beginning of the mission. The Marines who had questioned her competence were now seeking her expertise and guidance. She had proven herself not through words or arguments, but through actions under the most challenging circumstances possible. 3 weeks later, Rodriguez stood before a formation of Marine snipers at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, conducting advanced training on extreme-range shooting techniques. The Marines attending her classes included some of the most experienced snipers in the Corps, all eager to learn from the Marine who had made an impossible shot under combat conditions. The key to extreme-range shooting is understanding that environmental factors become exponentially more important as distance increases, Rodriguez explained to the class. At 800 meters, a 5-mile-per-hour error in wind calculation can result in a complete miss. Thompson, who had become one of her closest friends and strongest supporters, assisted with the training by sharing his perspective as a spotter during their engagement. Their partnership had evolved into a professional relationship based on mutual respect and shared combat experience. The Taliban commander's death had indeed disrupted enemy operations significantly. Intelligence reports indicated that his elimination had prevented a coordinated series of attacks against coalition forces and Afghan government targets. Rodriguez's single shot had saved dozens of lives and weakened terrorist operations throughout eastern Afghanistan. 6 months after their deployment, Rodriguez received a call from Williams, the Marine whose life had been saved by their actions. He had recovered fully from his wounds and returned to duty with his unit, but wanted to express his gratitude for the sacrifices made to ensure his survival. Rodriguez, I just wanted you to know that my kids know who you are, Williams said during their phone conversation. They understand that their daddy is alive because a Marine named Maria Rodriguez refused to leave anyone behind. Rodriguez hung up the phone and looked at the Navy Cross citation hanging on her office wall. The medal represented recognition for her actions, but, more importantly, it symbolized her acceptance by Marines who had initially questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. The morning sun streamed through her office window at Marine Corps Base Quantico, where Rodriguez now served as an instructor at the Scout Sniper School. Her students included both male and female Marines who would face the same challenges and doubts she had encountered during her own career. Today we're going to discuss extreme-range shooting under combat conditions, Rodriguez announced to her class of sniper candidates. The techniques you learn here might someday save the lives of your fellow Marines, just as they did for me in Afghanistan. As she began the lesson, Rodriguez thought about the journey that had brought her from a young woman in El Paso who could hit cans off fence posts to a Marine instructor sharing combat-proven techniques with the next generation of warriors. The doubters had been silenced not by arguments, but by results. The rifle she had named Esperanza now rested in a place of honor in her office, a reminder of the day when hope had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever. The 3-mile shot that saved her fellow Marines had proven that courage, skill, and determination could overcome any challenge, regardless of who pulled the trigger. Rodriguez had claimed her place among the elite warriors of the Marine Corps through actions that spoke louder than any words. She had proven that when Marines are in danger, it doesn't matter who provides salvation, only that someone steps forward when courage is required. The legend of the 800-meter shot would be told and retold throughout the Marine Corps for generations to come. But, for Rodriguez, the real victory wasn't the recognition or the medal. It was knowing that Williams had gone home to his children, and that she had earned her place among the Marines who never leave anyone behind. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the rocky hills of Afghanistan as Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope for what felt like the 100th time. The weight of doubt pressed harder on her shoulders than her 60-pound pack ever could. 3 months into her deployment with the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force, she had yet to prove herself to the men who questioned whether a woman belonged in their sniper team. Rodriguez had grown up in El Paso, Texas, where her father taught her to shoot cans off fence posts with his old hunting rifle. By age 12, she could hit a quarter at 200 yards. Her natural talent caught the attention of her high school JROTC instructor, who encouraged her to pursue military service. Despite her family's concerns about a young woman entering combat roles, Maria knew this was her calling. The Marine Corps Scout Sniper School had been the most challenging experience of her life. Out of the 43 candidates who started the course, only 12 graduated. Maria was the only woman. The physical demands tested every muscle in her body, but the mental pressure nearly broke her spirit. Instructors questioned her repeatedly about her motivations, suggesting she was taking a spot away from a more deserving male candidate. Her sniper partner, Corporal Jake Thompson from Alabama, had been assigned to work with her against his wishes. Thompson made no secret of his belief that women had no place in combat units. He followed orders professionally, but maintained an icy distance that made their partnership feel more like a punishment detail than a tactical team. The morning briefing had delivered sobering news. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value Taliban commander was moving through the region with a convoy of fighters. This commander, known by the code name White Wolf, had orchestrated multiple attacks against coalition forces and civilian targets. His capture or elimination would significantly disrupt enemy operations in the province. Captain James Mitchell, their company commander, outlined the mission parameters. 2 sniper teams would position themselves on opposite ridgelines overlooking the valley where the convoy was expected to pass. Rodriguez and Thompson would take the northern position, while the more experienced team of Sergeant First Class Williams and Corporal Davis would cover the southern approach. As they prepared their equipment, Thompson made his feelings clear once again. "This isn't training anymore, Rodriguez. Real lives depend on what happens out there. If you freeze up or miss your shot, good Marines die." Rodriguez checked her rifle methodically, running through the same routine she had performed thousands of times. Her weapon was a customized M40A5 sniper rifle, modified with a high-powered scope capable of accurate targeting at extreme ranges. She had named the rifle Esperanza, Spanish for hope, after her grandmother who had raised her when her parents worked double shifts to pay the bills. The insertion helicopter lifted off from Forward Operating Base Chapman at 0400 hours. The flight to their position would take 45 minutes through hostile territory where enemy fighters regularly attempted to shoot down aircraft with rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns. Rodriguez felt her stomach tighten as they flew through the darkness, the aircraft's engines straining against the thin mountain air. Thompson sat across from her in the helicopter's cargo bay, his face painted with camouflage makeup that made him look like a character from a war movie. He checked his equipment obsessively, adjusting his radio headset and verifying his ammunition count for the 3rd time. Despite his hostility toward her, Rodriguez recognized his professionalism and attention to detail. The helicopter pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. 2 minutes to insertion. Weather reports show possible sandstorm moving into the area this afternoon. Extraction window may be limited. Rodriguez felt the familiar pre-mission anxiety building in her chest. She had experienced it during every training exercise and combat patrol, but somehow it felt different this time. The stakes seemed higher, the pressure more intense. She closed her eyes and thought about her grandmother's words. Mija, God gives us challenges not to break us, but to show us how strong we really are. The helicopter touched down briefly on a rocky plateau 2 miles from their target position. Rodriguez and Thompson quickly gathered their gear and jumped out into the swirling dust kicked up by the rotor blades. Within seconds, the aircraft lifted off and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving them alone in enemy territory. They moved carefully through the rocky terrain, using night vision goggles to navigate the treacherous ground. Each step had to be calculated to avoid loose rocks that might create noise or cause them to lose their footing. Their route to the observation position would take them through a narrow canyon where enemy fighters sometimes placed improvised explosive devices. Thompson took point, his experience in the Afghan terrain evident in the way he selected each foothold and hand position during the climb. Despite his attitude toward her, Rodriguez had to admit he was an excellent soldier. His movements were economical and precise, wasting no energy while maintaining perfect tactical awareness of their surroundings. After 90 minutes of careful movement, they reached their designated position on a rocky outcropping that provided excellent visibility across the valley below. The spot offered natural concealment behind large boulders while giving them clear fields of fire in multiple directions. Thompson immediately began setting up his spotting scope while Rodriguez prepared her shooting position. The process of preparing a sniper hide required patience and attention to detail that most people could never understand. Every piece of equipment had to be positioned perfectly to avoid creating shadows or reflections that might reveal their location to enemy observers. Rodriguez arranged camouflage netting to break up the outline of her rifle while ensuring she maintained unrestricted movement for target engagement. As the sun rose over the mountains, the valley below came into sharp focus through their optics. The terrain was typical of eastern Afghanistan, steep-sided valleys carved by ancient rivers, with scattered villages connected by dirt roads that wound through the landscape like brown ribbons. Intelligence reports suggested the enemy convoy would use the main road that ran along the valley floor, but Rodriguez knew that experienced fighters often chose alternative routes to avoid predictable ambush sites. Thompson established radio contact with the other sniper team and their command post. The communications check revealed that all units were in position and ready to execute the mission. However, the weather forecast remained concerning. Meteorologists predicted that the sandstorm could arrive earlier than expected, potentially compromising their ability to engage targets or extract safely. At 0800 hours, their radio crackled with an urgent message from headquarters. All stations, be advised that drone surveillance has identified possible convoy movement 15 kilometers north of your position. Multiple vehicles with armed escorts, moving south toward target area. Rodriguez felt her heart rate increase as she adjusted her rifle scope and checked her range calculations once more. The distance to the road below was approximately 800 meters, well within the effective range of her weapon system. She had made similar shots hundreds of times during training, but this would be her first opportunity to engage enemy combatants in actual combat. Thompson peered through his spotting scope, scanning the northern approach to the valley. His job was to identify targets, calculate range and wind corrections, and guide Rodriguez's shots. Despite their personal conflicts, they had trained together extensively and developed effective communication procedures that would be critical during combat engagement. Movement on the ridge line, 11 o'clock, Thompson whispered into his radio microphone. Looks like possible scout element, 2 individuals with binoculars. Rodriguez shifted her rifle toward the indicated direction and acquired the targets through her scope. 2 men in military-style clothing were positioned on a rocky outcropping approximately 1,000 meters away, clearly observing the valley below through optical equipment. Their presence confirmed that the main convoy was likely approaching the area. The next 30 minutes passed with agonizing slowness as they waited for the primary targets to appear. Rodriguez controlled her breathing carefully, knowing that maintaining steady physiological functions would be critical for accurate shooting. She had learned meditation techniques during sniper training that helped manage pre-combat stress and maintain focus during extended observation periods. At 0847 hours, Thompson's voice carried new urgency. Vehicle movement on the main road, approximately 3 kilometers north. Count 6 vehicles, mixed military and civilian types. Rodriguez shifted her attention to the road and immediately spotted the convoy moving slowly through the valley. The lead vehicle appeared to be a modified pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the cargo bed. Behind it followed 2 sedan-type cars with tinted windows, likely carrying the high-value targets they had been sent to eliminate or capture. Confirm visual on primary convoy, Rodriguez whispered into her radio. 6 vehicles, armed escort visible. The convoy moved cautiously through the valley, clearly aware that they were in an area where coalition forces frequently conducted operations. The vehicles maintained tactical spacing and traveled at variable speeds, making it difficult for potential attackers to predict their exact timing and position. Thompson began calculating range and environmental factors that would affect Rodriguez's shots. The distance to the road was significant but manageable, assuming the convoy stopped or slowed down at a predictable location. However, moving targets at extended range presented challenges that required split-second timing and precise calculations. Wind speed approximately 8 miles per hour, left to right, Thompson reported. Temperature rising will affect bullet trajectory. Distance to center of road measures 840 meters. Rodriguez made the corresponding adjustments to her rifle scope, compensating for the environmental factors that Thompson had identified. Each variable could affect bullet flight path by several inches at extreme range, potentially meaning the difference between a successful engagement and a complete miss. The convoy continued its approach, now less than 2 kilometers from their position. Rodriguez could see additional details through her high-powered scope: armed fighters in the escort vehicles, radio antennas indicating sophisticated communications equipment, and heavily tinted windows on the target vehicles that prevented identification of the occupants. Suddenly, their radio erupted with an unexpected transmission from headquarters. All units, abort current mission. Repeat, abort current mission. Intelligence reports indicate possible civilian hostages in target vehicles. Rodriguez felt her stomach drop as the implications became clear. If civilians were being held in the convoy vehicles, any engagement could result in innocent casualties that would violate rules of engagement and potentially create an international incident. Thompson immediately responded, "Request clarification on civilian presence. Do we have confirmed visual identification?" The response came back within seconds. Negative on visual confirmation. Intelligence is based on intercepted communications suggesting hostages taken from village raid yesterday evening. Maintain observation, but do not engage without explicit authorization. Rodriguez kept her rifle trained on the approaching convoy while her mind raced through the tactical implications. They had been inserted into hostile territory with a specific mission that was now compromised by incomplete intelligence. The presence of possible hostages meant they could not engage the high-value targets without risk of killing innocent people. The convoy was now within 800 meters and closing on their position. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see the faces of the armed fighters in the escort vehicles. They appeared alert and professional, suggesting these were experienced combatants rather than untrained militia fighters. Visual confirmation on approximately 12 armed fighters, Thompson reported. Heavy weapons visible including rocket-propelled grenades and belt-fed machine guns. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly complex. Even if they received authorization to engage, the enemy force was significant enough to pose serious threats to their extraction. The original mission plan had assumed they would engage and immediately withdraw to their pickup point, but the current circumstances might require them to remain in position for extended periods. At that moment, their radio crackled with an urgent transmission from the other sniper team. Contact, contact, contact. Taking fire from multiple positions, request immediate support. The sound of gunfire echoed across the valley as the southern position came under attack from enemy forces that had apparently detected their presence. Rodriguez and Thompson found themselves in an impossible situation. Their fellow Marines were under fire, but they were positioned too far away to provide effective support. Thompson grabbed his radio. Delta 2-1, what is your status? Can you break contact and withdraw? The response was broken by static and the sound of explosions. Negative on withdrawal. Pinned down. Multiple casualties. Need immediate extraction. Rodriguez realized that their mission had just become infinitely more complicated. The carefully planned operation was falling apart. Their fellow Marines were fighting for their lives, and they were the only available assets that might be able to help. The convoy below continued its approach, unaware that coalition forces were engaged in combat less than 2 kilometers away. Rodriguez, we need to move, Thompson said, his earlier hostility replaced by professional urgency. Williams and Davis are in trouble, and we're the only team that can provide supporting fire. Rodriguez looked through her scope one last time at the convoy, now passing directly below their position. Somewhere in those vehicles might be the Taliban commander responsible for numerous attacks against coalition forces and Afghan civilians. But her fellow Marines needed help, and that took priority over any high-value target. She began breaking down her shooting position while Thompson packed their observation equipment. The movement to support the other team would take them across difficult terrain under potential enemy observation, but there was no choice. Marines never left other Marines behind, regardless of personal conflicts or mission parameters. As they prepared to move out, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that this deployment would test her in ways she had never imagined. The doubts of her male colleagues felt insignificant compared to the life and death decisions that lay ahead. This was what she had trained for, what she had sacrificed for, and what she would prove herself worthy of. The sound of gunfire continued to echo across the valley as they began their movement toward the embattled sniper team. Rodriguez checked her weapon one final time and followed Thompson down the rocky slope, not knowing that the next few hours would change everything she thought she knew about herself and her capabilities. The mission was just beginning. The movement across the rocky terrain took Rodriguez and Thompson 43 minutes of careful navigation through enemy-held territory. Each boulder and depression could hide hostile fighters, and the increasing volume of gunfire from the southern position indicated their fellow Marines were facing a determined enemy force. As they approached the area where Williams and Davis had established their sniper hide, the tactical situation became clearer through radio transmissions. The veteran sniper team had been discovered by a patrol of Taliban fighters who had apparently been conducting counter-surveillance operations specifically designed to locate coalition observation posts. Delta 2-1, this is Delta 1-2, Thompson transmitted as they moved into supporting positions. We are approximately 200 meters from your location and moving to provide assistance. The response came through heavy static. Roger, Delta 1-2, enemy force estimated at 20-plus fighters. Williams is hit bad. Need immediate medical evacuation. Rodriguez felt a cold knot form in her stomach as the implications became clear. Not only were their fellow Marines outnumbered and under heavy fire, but at least one of them was seriously wounded and required immediate medical attention that would not be available in their current tactical situation. Thompson signaled for her to take a position behind a large boulder that offered protection from enemy fire while providing good visibility toward the firefight. From this location, Rodriguez could see muzzle flashes from multiple weapons approximately 400 meters away, indicating that the Taliban fighters had surrounded the Marine position and were conducting a coordinated assault. I count at least 15 enemy positions, Rodriguez whispered into her radio microphone. They've got Williams and Davis completely pinned down in a natural depression with no covered routes for withdrawal. Thompson studied the tactical situation through his spotting scope, identifying enemy fighting positions and calculating ranges for potential engagement. The Taliban fighters had chosen their attack positions well, using natural terrain features to provide protection while maintaining clear fields of fire toward the trapped Marines. Range to nearest enemy position is 380 meters, Thompson reported. Multiple targets visible, but they're well concealed and using good tactical movement between positions. Rodriguez adjusted her rifle scope and began acquiring targets through the high-powered optics. The enemy fighters were experienced combatants who moved carefully between covered positions, making accurate engagement extremely difficult. They were clearly familiar with coalition tactics and had planned this ambush to neutralize the sniper team with minimal exposure to counterfire. The radio crackled with an urgent transmission from their company commander. All Delta stations, be advised that extraction helicopters are 30 minutes out, but landing zone is too hot for immediate pickup. You need to break contact and move to alternate extraction point Bravo. Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged glances as they realized the magnitude of their problem. The alternate extraction point was over 2 kilometers away across difficult terrain, and Williams was reportedly wounded too severely to make that movement without assistance. They would need to somehow rescue their fellow Marines and carry a wounded man through hostile territory while being pursued by a superior enemy force. Delta 2-1, this is Delta 1-2, Thompson transmitted. What is Williams' condition? Can he move under his own power? Davis responded between bursts of gunfire. Negative. Williams took shrapnel to the leg and is losing blood fast. He's conscious but can't walk. We need to get him out of here or he's going to bleed to death. Rodriguez realized that their tactical situation had just become exponentially more complex. They were facing a classic military dilemma: abandon their wounded comrade to save themselves, or risk all their lives attempting a rescue that might result in everyone being killed or captured. Thompson, we can't leave them, Rodriguez said quietly. Williams has 3 kids back home. Thompson nodded grimly. Despite his previous attitude toward Rodriguez, his commitment to fellow Marines was absolute. Agreed. We need to create a diversion to draw enemy fire away from their position, then move in for extraction under covering fire. Rodriguez studied the terrain between their position and the trapped Marines, looking for routes that would allow them to approach without being detected by enemy observers. The rocky landscape offered some concealment, but any movement would expose them to fire from multiple directions. I can provide precision fire to neutralize key enemy positions, Rodriguez suggested. If I can take out their machine gun team and a couple of riflemen, it might create enough confusion for you to reach Williams and Davis. Thompson considered the plan while continuing to observe the firefight through his spotting scope. The enemy machine gun position was located approximately 450 meters away on a rocky ridge that provided excellent fields of fire across the entire area. Eliminating that position would significantly reduce the enemy's ability to pin down the Marines. That machine gun position is going to be a difficult shot, Thompson warned. 450 meters, elevated target, and they're behind good cover. Plus, once you start shooting, every Taliban fighter in the area will know exactly where we are. Rodriguez chambered around and settled into a stable shooting position. The target was at the extreme end of her comfort zone, but the shot was technically feasible with proper calculations for range and environmental factors. More importantly, it was the only option that might save her fellow Marines. Wind speed has increased to 12 miles per hour, left to right, Thompson reported as he calculated firing solutions. Temperature is rising, which will affect bullet trajectory. Range to machine gun position is 447 meters. Rodriguez made the corresponding adjustments to her scope, compensating for the environmental variables that Thompson had identified. At this range, even minor miscalculations could result in missing the target entirely and revealing their position without achieving any tactical advantage. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see the enemy machine gun team clearly. 2 fighters were operating a Soviet-era PK machine gun from a position behind a large rock formation. They were maintaining sustained fire toward the trapped Marines, preventing any attempt at movement or counterattack. I have a clear shot at the machine gunner, Rodriguez reported. Ready to engage on your command. Thompson coordinated with Davis over the radio to ensure that their attack would be synchronized with any movement by the trapped Marines. The timing would be critical. Rodriguez needed to neutralize key enemy positions at the exact moment that Thompson began his movement toward Williams and Davis. Delta 2-1, on my mark. Prepare to move to covered position 15 meters to your east, Thompson transmitted. We are engaging enemy positions in 3, 2, 1 mark. Rodriguez squeezed the trigger with smooth, controlled pressure, feeling the rifle recoil against her shoulder as the bullet left the barrel. Through her scope, she watched the projectile impact exactly where she had aimed. The enemy machine gunner dropped instantly, his weapon falling silent. Immediately, Rodriguez shifted to her secondary target, an enemy rifleman who was positioned to cover approaches to the trapped Marines. The second shot required a slight adjustment for range and wind, but the target was clearly visible and stationary. Another smooth trigger pull sent the second round downrange with lethal accuracy. Thompson was already moving toward the trapped Marines as Rodriguez continued engaging enemy positions. Her rapid, precise shooting was having the desired effect. The remaining Taliban fighters were taking cover and focusing their attention on locating her position rather than maintaining their coordinated assault on Williams and Davis. Good shooting, Rodriguez. Davis transmitted over the radio. Enemy fire has definitely decreased. Thompson is almost to our position. Rodriguez continued scanning for targets while maintaining awareness of Thompson's movement across the battlefield. Her partner was using proper tactical movement techniques, advancing from cover to cover while the enemy remained focused on trying to locate her shooting position. Suddenly, her radio erupted with alarming news from their company commander. All Delta stations, be advised that enemy reinforcements are moving into your area. Drone surveillance indicates approximately 30 additional fighters approaching from the north in vehicles. Rodriguez felt her blood run cold as the implications became clear. They were already facing a superior enemy force, and now additional reinforcements were arriving that would make their situation virtually hopeless. The window for successful extraction was closing rapidly. Thompson, you need to hurry, Rodriguez transmitted. We've got major problems coming our way. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see Thompson reaching the depression where Williams and Davis had been trapped. The wounded Marine was conscious, but clearly in serious condition, with blood-soaked bandages around his left leg indicating significant trauma from shrapnel or bullet wounds. Williams is in bad shape, but he's alert, Thompson reported. Davis and I can carry him, but we need covering fire for the movement to Extraction Point Bravo. Rodriguez realized that providing effective covering fire for a 2-kilometer movement would require her to maintain constant engagement with enemy forces while her teammates carried a wounded man across difficult terrain. It was a tactical scenario that pushed the limits of what a single sniper could accomplish. I'll provide overwatch and engage targets of opportunity, Rodriguez responded. You focus on getting Williams to the extraction point. I'll catch up when I can. Thompson's voice carried obvious concern. Rodriguez, that's a suicide mission. You can't hold off 30-plus fighters by yourself. Rodriguez adjusted her position to better observe the northern approach where enemy reinforcements would appear. Through her scope, she could already see dust clouds indicating vehicle movement approximately 1 kilometer away. The additional Taliban fighters would arrive within minutes and completely overwhelm their small force. Someone needs to slow down those reinforcements, or we all die here, Rodriguez stated matter-of-factly. Williams has kids to go home to. Get him out of here. Davis joined the radio conversation as he and Thompson prepared to move Williams. Rodriguez, we're not leaving you behind. Marines don't abandon Marines. Rodriguez felt a wave of emotion as she realized that these men who had questioned her worthiness were now refusing to abandon her despite the tactical situation. However, she also understood that sentiment couldn't override tactical reality. Someone needed to delay the enemy reinforcements, or they would all be killed or captured. Davis, Thompson, this is not a discussion, Rodriguez transmitted with authority she didn't know she possessed. Your priority is getting Williams to medical care. I can hold this position and delay the reinforcements long enough for you to reach the extraction point. Through her scope, Rodriguez could now see the lead vehicles of the enemy reinforcement convoy. They were traveling in a loose formation along the valley road, clearly confident that their overwhelming numbers would be sufficient to eliminate the remaining coalition forces. Enemy vehicles now visible, range approximately 800 meters, and closing, Rodriguez reported. Multiple gun trucks with heavy weapons. You need to move now. Thompson and Davis began their movement carrying Williams between them, using a fireman's carry technique that allowed them to move quickly while sharing the wounded Marine's weight. Rodriguez watched their progress while simultaneously tracking the approaching enemy vehicles. The Taliban reinforcements were moving faster than she had anticipated, clearly eager to join the firefight and eliminate the coalition sniper team. The lead vehicle was a modified pickup truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the cargo bed, followed by 2 additional trucks carrying armed fighters. Rodriguez calculated range and lead angles for engaging the moving vehicles, knowing that hitting targets traveling at speed would require precise timing and accurate prediction of their movement. The shots would be at the extreme range of her weapon system, but stopping the lead vehicle might create a traffic jam that would delay the entire convoy. Range to lead vehicle is 720 meters and decreasing rapidly, Rodriguez reported to herself while making final adjustments to her scope. Target is moving approximately 40 kilometers per hour, left to right across my field of fire. She settled into a stable shooting position and controlled her breathing as the lead vehicle approached the optimal engagement point. The shot would require leading the target by several vehicle lengths to account for travel time of the bullet at extended range. Rodriguez squeezed the trigger at the exact moment when her calculations indicated maximum probability of hit. Through her scope, she watched the bullet strike the vehicle's windshield, causing it to swerve violently off the road and roll over in a cloud of dust and debris. The convoy immediately stopped as the remaining vehicles took evasive action and their occupants dismounted to establish defensive positions. Rodriguez's single shot had achieved exactly what she hoped. The enemy reinforcements were delayed and focused on locating her position rather than pursuing Thompson, Davis, and Williams. Lead vehicle disabled, Rodriguez reported. Enemy dismounting and taking positions. Estimate 15 to 20 additional fighters now deployed. Her radio crackled with Thompson's voice. Outstanding shooting, Rodriguez. We're making good time toward the extraction point. Williams is stable but needs medical attention urgently. Rodriguez shifted her attention back to the original enemy force, which was now reorganizing and attempting to coordinate with the newly arrived reinforcements. Through her scope, she could see Taliban fighters using hand signals and radio communications to develop a plan for assaulting her position. The tactical situation was becoming increasingly desperate. Rodriguez was now facing approximately 40 enemy fighters who were working to surround her position and eliminate the last remaining coalition presence in the area. Her ammunition supply was limited, and she had no viable route for withdrawal that wouldn't expose her to overwhelming enemy fire. Rodriguez, what's your ammunition status? Thompson inquired over the radio. Rodriguez checked her remaining ammunition, 23 rounds for her primary rifle and 40 rounds for her sidearm. Against 40 enemy fighters, those numbers represented a very limited engagement capability that would require perfect accuracy and tactical positioning. 23 rounds remaining for primary weapon, Rodriguez reported. I can maintain engagement for approximately 10 more minutes before I'll need to withdraw. The enemy fighters were now moving to positions that would allow them to conduct a coordinated assault on her location. Rodriguez could see them using proper tactical movement techniques, indicating these were experienced combatants rather than untrained militia fighters. Through her scope, Rodriguez identified what appeared to be the enemy commander directing the movement of fighters into assault positions. He was positioned approximately 500 meters away behind a large boulder, using a radio to coordinate the attack while remaining in covered positions. I have visual on possible enemy commander, Rodriguez reported. Range 500 meters, target is in covered position but occasionally exposed during radio transmissions. Eliminating the enemy commander might disrupt their coordination and buy additional time for Thompson, Davis, and Williams to reach the extraction point. However, the shot would be technically challenging due to the target's limited exposure and the extended range involved. Rodriguez settled into her shooting position and began timing the enemy commander's exposure pattern. He appeared for approximately 3 seconds every 30 seconds while coordinating with his subordinate units, providing a narrow window for engagement. Target exposure pattern identified, Rodriguez murmured to herself. 3-second window every 30 seconds. Range 512 meters. She adjusted her scope for the increased range and waited for the next exposure opportunity. Through her optics, Rodriguez could see the enemy commander clearly as he emerged from behind the boulder to observe his fighter's movement. The shot required perfect timing and accuracy. Rodriguez controlled her breathing and squeezed the trigger at the optimal moment, sending the bullet across 500 meters of Afghan terrain toward the target. The enemy commander dropped immediately, his radio falling silent as his subordinate units lost their coordination. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Enemy fighters stopped their coordinated movement and began clustering around their fallen leader, creating confusion and delay in their assault plans. Enemy commander down, Rodriguez reported with satisfaction. Enemy force appears to be experiencing coordination problems. Her radio crackled with urgent transmission from their company commander. All Delta stations, extraction helicopters are inbound to pick up Point Bravo. Estimated arrival in 8 minutes. All personnel need to be at extraction point for immediate pickup. Rodriguez realized that her delaying action had been successful. Thompson, Davis, and Williams would have enough time to reach the extraction point and receive immediate medical evacuation for the wounded Marine. However, her own situation remained desperate with no clear route to reach the pickup point before the helicopters departed. Delta 1-2, what is your position? The company commander inquired. Thompson responded immediately. Delta 1-2 is 300 meters from extraction point Bravo with wounded personnel. Rodriguez is maintaining rear guard action approximately 1 kilometer south of our position. The company commander's voice carried obvious concern. Rodriguez, can you break contact and reach extraction point in time for pickup? Rodriguez studied the terrain between her current position and the extraction point while enemy fighters continued to reorganize around her location. The route would take her across open ground that was covered by multiple enemy positions, making movement virtually impossible without being detected and engaged. Negative on reaching extraction point, Rodriguez transmitted. Enemy has overwatch positions covering all approaches. Recommend you extract the wounded and return for me with follow-up mission. Thompson's voice immediately responded. Rodriguez, we are not leaving you behind. Give me 2 minutes to get Williams loaded, and I'll come back for you. Rodriguez felt a surge of emotion as she realized that her partner was willing to risk his own life to ensure she made it out safely. However, she also understood that Thompson's return would likely result in both of them being killed or captured by the overwhelming enemy force. Thompson, that's an order, Rodriguez transmitted with authority. Get Williams medical attention. That's the priority mission. The sound of helicopters was now audible in the distance as the extraction aircraft approached the pickup point. Rodriguez knew that the window for evacuation was measured in minutes, and any delay could result in the aircraft being engaged by enemy fire or forced to abort the mission. Through her scope, Rodriguez could see enemy fighters beginning to move toward her position again, clearly determined to eliminate the sniper who had been causing significant casualties to their force. They were using covered approaches and coordinated movement that indicated professional military training. Extraction birds are on final approach, the company commander reported. All personnel need to be loaded in 90 seconds or we abort the mission. Rodriguez made rapid calculations about her ammunition, enemy positions, and tactical options. She had 18 rounds remaining, faced approximately 35 enemy fighters, and had no viable withdrawal route that wouldn't result in being overrun. However, she also realized that her mission was complete. Williams would receive the medical attention that might save his life. Thompson and Davis would return safely to their families, and the high-value target convoy had been disrupted enough to prevent their planned operations. Delta 1-2 loaded and lifting off, Thompson reported. Rodriguez, we're coming back for you. Hold your position. Rodriguez smiled grimly as she settled into her shooting position for what might be her final engagement. She had proven herself to these Marines who had doubted her capabilities, and, more importantly, she had accomplished her mission of protecting her fellow service members. The enemy fighters were now within 200 meters and closing rapidly on her position. Rodriguez acquired her first target through the scope and prepared to make every shot count in the fight that would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise.